Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel Universal Visions. For more than a decade, India has projected confidence on the world stage. Prime Minister Modi shaking hands at global summits, packed arenas during overseas visits. India described as a rising power that can talk to everyone. But today, a quieter question is emerging in policy circles. If India's global standing has never been stronger, why does it seem to have fewer strategic options when pressure arrives? Before we go any further, subscribe to Universal Visions if you want analysis that looks beyond slogans and sound bites. Since 2014, India's foreign policy has revolved around a clear narrative. India is confident, decisive, and no longer constrained by old habits. India can maintain relations with competing powers without being forced to choose. And India's leadership commands personal respect internationally. For a long time, this narrative felt credible. India balanced relations with the US and Russia. It strengthened ties with Gulf countries. It increased visibility across Africa and the Indo-Pacific. But foreign policy success is not measured by attention. It is measured by outcomes during moments of stress. And in the last few years, those moments have multiplied. Here's the key question to keep in mind as we move forward. When global pressure increases, does India gain leverage or lose flexibility? Share your initial thought in the comments. We will revisit this at the end. The relationship with the United States is a good place to start. India and the US refer to each other as strategic partners. That description is not inaccurate. Defense cooperation has expanded. Technology partnerships have grown. Political dialogue is frequent. However, the return of Donald Trump has reintroduced a harder tone. Trade deficits matter more than strategic language. Tariffs are back on the table. Economic pressure is once again central to U.S. diplomacy. India now faces renewed tariff threats on key exports. This is not hypothetical. It is documented. At the same time, India has reduced purchases of Russian oil that had earlier helped stabilize domestic prices. This shift is significant because it reveals something important. India's room for maneuver narrows when economic pressure escalates. If strategic autonomy weakens under trade pressure, how independent is foreign policy in practice? If this question matters to you, hit like. It helps this discussion reach a wider audience. Russia has been a pillar of India's foreign policy for decades. Defense systems, energy cooperation, diplomatic support at difficult moments. India has tried to preserve this relationship while avoiding direct confrontation with the West. It has avoided explicitly condemning Moscow. At the same time, it has adjusted behavior to limit Western backlash. This balancing act is increasingly fragile. From Russia's perspective, India appears cautious and distant. From the West's perspective, India is still too neutral. The risk here is not a sudden rupture. The risk is slow erosion of trust on both sides. In diplomacy, ambiguity buys time, not loyalty. Now let's turn to Iran and the Chabahar Port project. Chabahar was not designed as a symbolic gesture. It was a strategic investment. It allowed India access to Afghanistan and Central Asia. It bypassed Pakistan. It countered China's growing footprint in the region. However, U.S. sanctions on Iran made sustained involvement costly. Over time, India's engagement slowed. Recent signals suggest India is scaling back further. This is not a public withdrawal. It is a quiet step back. For Iran, this reinforces doubts about India's ability to act independently under pressure. And in the background, China continues to expand its influence. At this point, a pattern is becoming visible. When faced with sustained pressure, India often chooses caution over commitment. Is that strategic realism, or is it strategic hesitation? Let me know what you think in the comments. India's immediate neighborhood offers perhaps the clearest test of its influence. Nepal has challenged earlier assumptions on alignment. The Maldives has publicly reduced India's military presence. Sri Lanka is carefully balancing India and China. Bangladesh cooperation continues but remains strictly interest-based. None of this means India has lost the region, but it does mean influence is no longer automatic. At the same time, Pakistan has quietly rebuilt ties with Gulf countries and maintains strong backing from China. This does not signal Pakistan's diplomatic dominance. It does, however, weaken the claim that India alone shapes regional outcomes. Quick check-in. Do you believe India's regional influence is growing or shrinking? Drop a one-line answer below. I read every serious comment. Another important factor is how foreign policy is managed. Under PM Modi, diplomacy has become highly centralized. This produces strong optics and consistency in messaging. But it also reduces institutional flexibility. When foreign policy becomes personality-driven, adaptation becomes harder. Mistakes are not openly acknowledged. Course corrections are delayed. Strong leadership is most valuable when it absorbs feedback, not when it relies solely on narrative. To remain fair and factual, India has achieved real gains. Global visibility has increased. India is viewed as a key market. It plays a role in balancing China in the Indo-Pacific. But visibility is not influence, and interest is not alliance. When pressure intensifies, India often negotiates alone rather than as part of a committed bloc. So, is India isolated? Not in the traditional sense, but it is more exposed than the official narrative suggests. The core issue is not isolation. It is over-reliance on optics and underinvestment in durable alliances. Foreign policy rewards patience, credibility, and consistency. The next decade will test whether India can convert visibility into influence. If you want grounded, fact-based analysis without political noise, subscribe to Universal Visions, like the video, and share your perspective in the comments. This conversation is just getting started.